Hello and welcome back to Scriptcase by Jamie. My name is Jamie, of course, and I am your host here today, well, every day. And today's main topic is Docker. So let's check it out and be right back. And I will be right back. So hello everyone and welcome back to Scriptcase by Jamie. After a little break, we are back with some interesting videos. Well, I hope they are interesting for you anyway. And if they're not, well, let me know down in the comments. And if they are, do the same please. It's always good to know what you like and what you don't like. So today, we are diving into Docker. Now, before I start, I will show you first of all here the Scriptcase Brazil page. Now notice that Brazil is spelled with an S and not with a Z, and there you have the official Scriptcase Brazil YouTube channel. Now there was a video or two videos posted here 4 weeks ago as well as a few days ago that is on using Scriptcase in Docker. Now there is a little difference here, so today's video is going to be very different from this one because Elias, which is pretty awesome in this video, shows you how you can set up Docker on a Linux operating system, and as many of you know, I use Windows, like half of the world, or more than that actually. But anyway, so I use Windows and I will be setting up and installing Docker here with you guys today, and showing you how you can use Docker as a development environment for your Scriptcase projects. Now, as I was saying, the difference between this video here is a setup of Scriptcase, so the development environment within a Docker container. Now, within Eli's tests here, it's actually working much faster. Now, I'm not too sure if I would use Scriptcase that way, but it is an option. So if you use Linux, well, maybe give it a go. It will definitely allow you to recover your Scriptcase environment a lot faster. Now, as I said in today's video, we are going to be diving into Docker. But before we do so, let's discuss first of all what Docker is all about. So the purpose of Docker, what's the big deal, you may wonder? Well, Docker is basically a package application, and it has all of its dependencies in a single standardized unit called a container. And these containers, well, they run consistently on any machine, which is what makes these really powerful. So now imagine developing your project, because it happens many times, it works here, but it doesn't work there. And with Docker, you solve those kind of situations. So you can basically deploy your project, set it up within a Docker container, and then deploy the Docker container, which is pretty awesome. So you can think of it as a container that is self-contained as a shipping box within your application, and the sizes can vary as you are seeing within the image at the moment. Now, inside this box or container, you not only have your code, but also everything you need to run the operating system libraries, the system tools, as well as any other dependencies that you may require. So if you are a Python developer, or you like React, for instance, Docker is amazing. Okay, so I've used it many times for those purposes, and recently I've started using it for Scriptcase development, because with that I can set up a database and it's running in seconds. Really, really easy. Now, this basically means these containers, that everything's contained within this container. It basically means that any developer or a tester or maybe a production server can run all of the same dependencies, let's say, tools and libraries within the exact same container. Now, this eliminates environmental consistencies, for instance, and makes the development lifecycle so much more reliable and even efficient. Now, I will point out one quick thing here before I continue, and that is that Docker is very easy to use, but at the same time it's very important that you do have hardened images. Now, we will check that out a little later, because by default you will have open images basically, and when you then go to deploy them maybe on a client server, well, they're open and easy to hack, let's say. So having those hardened images is very, very important for those projects that you want to deploy online. Now, here locally, as I have my setup, it is not going to matter. I can use any of those images and then just deploy on any of my machines here and set it up, which is pretty damn powerful. Now, Docker, what is it used for? Well, it's used basically to solve all of those common development problems, as well as the deployment challenges that we all face. Well, most of us anyway. So it makes it quite essential these days for so many professionals. Now, it provides you with consistent environments. Okay, so that ensures basically that your applications behave as they should do, and in the same way, whether they are deployed locally for development, on another server for testing maybe, and then of course for live production. So you won't have that. It doesn't work on my machine, but it works on another machine, or it works here and it doesn't work there. So you can forget all of those kind of excuses, because, well, I say they're excuses, but they're basically issues, and we all sometimes suffer from those. So it's never good to say to a client that it works here, I'm sorry, it doesn't work there, what do you want me to do? Well, in those cases, Docker is the solution. Develop and set it up in Docker, and you will be able to deploy it pretty much anywhere. So one of the other features is that it allows for rapid deployment. So all of these containers are very lightweight, and they can be started in seconds, which we will see in a few moments. So this of course allows for fast as well as super efficient deployment of all of your applications that you have developed, whether that be in Scriptcase or whether that be in Python or wherever you like. So another great feature is that you have application isolation. So within each container, you can package your elements basically, and you can have all of your applications run on the same host without interfering with one another, which is very nice. So this is pretty awesome for microservice architectures, for instance, or pretty much any architecture really. Now, it is very scalable also, so Docker does make it very easy to scale your applications. So if you handle more traffic, or if you need to have more instances maybe of the same container, or another database for instance, or whatever it is you need, then you can use it. Now, in today's video, I will be covering a bit more information about Docker. But at the same time, we will be diving into it, and I will be sharing a few of my stacks with you, and I will be, of course, covering what that means. So before we start, let's carry on a little bit here talking about Docker. So the basics of Docker. What is it? You know, we've just talked what the purpose of it is and what it's for, basically, as well as how you can, well, maybe use it within your own infrastructure, why you would use it. Now, Docker does involve a few fundamental concepts which are very important, as well as commands. And there is a typical workflow that consists of creating a Docker file. which essentially builds an image and then runs a container from that image, which is, again, scalable, right? And isolated, and allows you then for the rapid deployment, because then you're just going to grab those images and off you go. Now, there are a few key concepts there. So you have basically a Docker file, and this is a text file that contains instructions for building a Docker image. It's basically like a recipe, for instance, which contains all of the information regarding your application environment. Now, you have then also an image. Now, the image is a read-only template built from a Docker file. It is basically a blueprint of your application as well as its environment. Now, and these images are stored within a registry such as the Docker Hub. So you obtain these directly from Docker. Okay, so you know these images are typically okay. If you receive them from elsewhere, then maybe not. But you can also create these images yourself, which again makes Docker super powerful. Now, another key concept is the container, which is a runnable instance of an image. As you see here on your screen, you have containers here, and we will slightly go into this. Now, the container is a runnable instance of one of the images that we've just downloaded, say from the Docker Hub. And this is where your application actually runs, not within the image, not within the Docker file, but within the container. And a single image can be used to create multiple containers. So we can grab that one image and we can deploy 50 times, for instance, which is pretty awesome. Now, we do have some basic commands as well as then a Docker file that we would create. And I'm going to copy paste maybe an example here. So let me open here a notepad. And let me drag that here into my screen. And then here I have my text file, for instance. And here, if I just paste in there, that would then be, for instance, an example of a Docker file. Now, I will not be creating Docker files here today, so I'm going to show you a much easier way, and that is, again, with the stacks, which I was talking about previously. And then with the commands, basically, once we've created here our Docker file, we would then run a command. So for instance, we would say Docker, and it would be build -t, and then it would be my application, whatever that is called. So my app is then my app name. And then just like that, Docker will build your environment basically, and well, set it ready for you to run. And it's important to note that we have here a dot we need to add here at the end, because that basically tells it to then use the current directory with this name. And then we have then also another command that we would then add. So that basically builds our application, sets that up within Docker, and then we run another command, and that is Docker run to run our application -p, and then we give it our port numbers. So if we have a typical port that we use, and then we have the port defined by the application, and then again we define my app, or the application name that we are using, and then this command will then basically run your container in the foreground and then maps the ports to the ports here on your host system. Now that is very important. So basically in this case I would then access my environment by adding then localhost, and in this case we have then the port 8080 defined here, and that's what we have there. And then just like that we could then basically access our service, well, HTTP that is, and then just like that we access then our Docker environment that we've then basically configured within our desktop or browser or whatever else. Okay, so it's quite important to use and very easy to use. Now, of course, with the commands as well as then the creation of the Docker file, you can have a lot more work to do. And in some cases, it's much easier to use a stack. And again, we will come into that. So now, as I mentioned previously, I use Windows, as many of you know already. So on Windows, it's pretty important because using Docker on a Windows operating system is, or was, should I say, a bit of a workaround until we had here the Docker desktop. And the Docker desktop is a pretty awesome application. It provides us with a really nice and seamless experience, as well as it's quite user-friendly. It is the recommended way today of using Docker on a Windows operating system. If you use Linux, then I would highly recommend you check out here the Brazil video, and then with that you will have, well, more information on using that in Linux. So with the Docker desktop, we then have basically an all-in-one package. Okay, and we can see here we have the containers, images, volumes, builds, and so forth. And as I said, I will go ahead and download that, install it, because I just uninstalled it, and then we will check that out. Now, this all-in-one package, let's say, includes the Docker engine. It includes the Docker CLI, so the command line interface, as well as Docker Compose, and of course, a GUI, or a graphical user interface, for us to use Docker instead of via command, which can make things a little easier. Now, the technology behind Docker leverages the Windows WSL2 subsystem, which is designed for Linux, right? So instead of having a heavy traditional virtual machine, such as Hyper-V, or maybe some, well, whatever it is you use, and instead of having that, you can have a lightweight Linux kernel that basically runs within Windows natively, I should mention, and of course it is much faster. It is better integrated with your Windows file system, and well, you have many less issues. So if you are going to use Docker on Windows, then definitely use here the Docker desktop. Okay, don't use the default command line option. It will be complicated and you may have problems then with Windows. Now, there are some key features here for this Docker desktop within Windows, and that is, first of all, it provides us with a very easy installation. It is a single file, so if I download this here, I can come then here to Windows AMD 64 or the Windows ARM 64, whichever Windows you are running. I'm guessing you're going to have the AMD 64 because ARM 64 is for ARM CPUs, just so you know, and then we can just click that. It will then download. So basically keep the default settings and click OK. Docker will then be installed on your Windows operating system, and then from there we will be able to start using it. So let's go ahead and discuss a little more. So some of those key features are, of course, it's easy to use. The installation is a single file. It provides us with a GUI, or a graphical user interface. And it also has a dashboard where we can then view the containers, the images, the volumes, and pretty much everything we need related to Docker. The file system has full integration, so you can easily mount directories from your Windows host machine into a container, which is of course pretty crucial for your development needs. Now, you have native WSL integration, which we had selected and left. Now, we have then also an extra, which we will be installing in a few moments. So we're going to add that. Once Docker Desktop has finished installing, we will check out Portainer, because Portainer allows us then to manage Docker much easier. We can add stacks, for instance, which is then basically a complete setup of an environment, which I will show you in a few moments. I will also share that down in the description, so you will be able to download the same files I have here, and I will be sharing them with you. Okay, so now that we have Docker installed, I will go ahead and double click on the desktop icon that I have now, and that will then go ahead and open or start Docker for me. And let me just check that. Now, it can take a few moments to run the first time because, of course, it's just installed and it's similar to a virtual machine, but much lighter and much easier to use, especially with the Portainer add-on. And then once Docker has been installed and you start it for the first time, you accept here the subscription service agreement. So I'll just click accept there, and that should then start running. Now you can log in then with your email address. So I have here my email address. Let me add that in there, jamie@jamieoates.com. And I will then click on continue. Now, once you have logged in, it will actually connect you to the Docker services, and what I'll actually do is skip that for now because I don't really need to use that right now, and I think my username is actually quite different from what I have there, and I don't really want to share that one. Okay, so we have here the Docker GUI, and this is very important. So I will remove here the page behind, and then we have here also then basically our container. Now I don't know if I can increase the size of this. So there we go, look at that. We can then increase the size of that, and it's covering then our screen. So the first thing I'm going to do once I have Docker installed is basically come here to the extensions. And then once I have the extensions here open, I can add here into the search window Portainer, or just port, and then we will have here the option for Portainer. And as it says, this is a Docker container management made simple with the world's most popular GUI-based container management platform, which Docker is. And Portainer makes the management and use of Docker much simpler. And on top of that, it allows you remote access within your network. So basically I can sit downstairs in the house and I can just access Portainer and launch a new Docker environment, which is pretty damn powerful. So once I'm ready, I'll just click here on install and Portainer will be installed. Okay, and there it is going there, and it will then be accessible here under the extensions, and then I can just click here on Portainer. So what I'll do then first of all is I will connect, or get started should I say, because we're proceeding here with a local environment, but with Portainer you can set this up within Docker and you can add it or use any other Docker environments you have within your network. So for instance, I have Docker pretty much on every machine here. I could then connect it to all of them and manage them all within this one Portainer instance. Personally, I prefer to have Portainer on each of them and then manage them that way. So if I click on the add environment, you'll see here I have all of these options. We can add the Docker standalone, the swarm, the podman, the Kubernetes. I suffer with that word. I suffer with some words, as you know already. So Kubernetes, and we can use those within Docker. So I'll just come back here to the home page. And we have here our local environment. So I'll just dismiss there the news. And we have with that our local environment here. And then if I click on this, it will then basically connect to the local Docker environment that I have here. So the one that I just installed. Okay, so we have here, so with this we can then download any of these available templates. So we're going to see here that there are quite a few already. Drupal, WordPress, and all of these others are basically HTTP server. We have PHP in here. We have MariaDB in here. We have pretty much everything you would want. Joomla, MariaDB, Mongo, and we can just select any of these and then deploy them within Docker. So I'm not going to do that now. I'm actually going to add a stack. So with these stacks, I can basically set up all of my containers. So I have here my containers, my images, which we have here. So you always have a default image there to start with. You have your networks, so you can network your containers together. You have volumes, which is where then you store all of the data from your containers, meaning you can recover things very easily. Okay, so let's start here with the stack. So if I come here and add stack, and I will call this my/dev, and this would then be my typical development environment. I'm just going to copy paste it in here because otherwise you're going to see this is actually quite a big stack I have going here. And the first thing I do is create, first of all, the version of this stack. We have then our networks defined. So here I have a monitor-net, and that creates then here our bridge of all of these services so they can communicate with one another. We have then the services that we are then applying. And the first one being Apache and PHP. So we are installing a PHP 8.1 as well as an Apache server. And here I have then the container name, restart options. So unless I stop the container, or I can set it to restart myself every 24 hours or whichever. But because I use this locally, I generally stop the stack, or the containers as and when I need. Start and stop as you need, which is pretty awesome. We have then the ports defined here. So the default port is port 80, and we assign 8080 to this environment. We have here then also the volume defined. So here I have then local storage www, and then we have here the var HTML folder. We set up the environment as well as then the local area, which I have defined because, as you know, Scriptcase requires some of this. I have a command here which then also launches a bash script, and as you can see, that basically updates and installs everything required for Scriptcase. So once you have this stack, you can deploy it locally and use it for your own Scriptcase deployments or projects or whatever you like. And this basically sets everything up for you. It even configures the phpInit file for you, so you can upload and download and not have any issues. You have the time zone set here for the phpInit also, and so forth. So all of that is ready there for you. And notice that here I define again the networks so that it connects then to the monitor-net network, which we defined at the top here. Now, after the PHP Apache, we have then the MySQL server. So here I set up MySQL, again pretty similar details, but here we have an environment option where we set up then the root password, the username, the password for the database, and so forth. Again, also the volume and networks interfaces. So of course, in your case, you will want to change these, and of course, if it's live, then maybe you would want to change these as well. Now below that, I then also have phpMyAdmin, so that I can access the MySQL database from a beautiful GUI, and I can then manage the database as I need to, just as you would with an online hosting partner. So with that, you have phpMyAdmin, you have MySQL, you have your PHP and Apache set up. So basically, we're ready to go already. So here again, we have some environment setups, and that is then for phpMyAdmin, so we can log in. We have there the local host, we have the username and the password, and again, the networks defined. Now, with that, I've also added some extra features because, you know, generally I like to have a file browser so I can just upload the files very easily. I can see what's there, maybe even make adjustments. So I've added here also the file browser, which is pretty awesome, definitely worth checking out. And that is then accessible here on localhost 8082. We then also have FTP. So I could connect via FTP and then also upload my files as if I need to. However you please. It's pretty straightforward and then very easy to use. And again, we have the default ports here defined. Now, with that, I also have a backup feature that I have added to this, and that basically connects then to the database and then backs up the database all the time so that I have a copy of it. Now, there is also a replication feature. So that is something maybe I'll look into in another video, but you can also replicate your containers as well as everything else regarding your project all the time. Well, whenever you like, basically, and you can just set that up, but maybe we'll cover that in another video. In this stack, I do not have that. I just have a backup here for the database, which I'm pretty happy with. Now, as you'll see, I do have a full backup applied here also for the storage drives, and that I find pretty handy because then, of course, I can make changes, or if something goes wrong, I can just recover from the backup. Now, that may not be needed for all of you, so if you don't like it, you can just go ahead and delete that section, and then it's as simple as that. Now we have then here the volume defined, which is then the MySQL data. So that is a complete stack with all of your containers, images, basically volumes, as well as then the network all set up, ready to go. And believe me, that is so much simpler than having to go through command line, for instance, or CLI. Now, if you need help setting up any of these, like I said, there are options here for the templates, and you can save this as a template also, which I generally do. Now once you've done that, we can then add extra environment variables if we want to. We can load an environment file, as well as then restrict the access to administrators, or restrict it for users and teams if we have those defined within Docker, of course. Now once I'm ready, I can just click on deploy the stack. Now, Docker will go ahead and download those image files that I have defined here. So you see them here for the file browser, image phpMyAdmin, image MySQL 5.7, image PHP 8.1, and Apache. So those images are now being downloaded. We can see at the bottom here the RAM usage, as well as the CPU usage and the disk space used, and that is very handy. Now we have here also a terminal window, so if you really want to use the command line or CLI, you can do so right there and use then this terminal. Now as you see, my stack has now been deployed, and it's pretty straightforward. So now I just click on my stack and I can see all of my options here running. So now let me open up a page here, and what I can then do is then show you this running now. So if I come then here to, first of all, localhost, and we have 8080, and if I go like so, we should then have our localhost error connection refused. So localhost 8080. So let's check these ports here again. 8081 we have here, 8082 and 3307 for MySQL. So if I come here to 8082 first, let me come back here and let's go 8082. And there we have then the file browser. Okay, so with the file browser, we also have then the phpMyAdmin, and that is on port 8081, it says here, and let's double check that here, phpMyAdmin 8081, and if I then come here to 8081, and then coming here to the localhost 8081, we have then here our phpMyAdmin, and we can then use any of these databases that we have here, and you can see that there is still actually a database, the dev_db, which is from my previous setup. So basically I removed Docker, I uninstalled it, and now I've gone ahead and basically placed the same stack that I used previously, or that I have been using here on this machine, and then basically it is still available because the drives, the images, the builds, the volumes, it's basically all still available. And with that, we can then recover our system very easily. So you can see then using Docker can be pretty awesome. And of course we can then adjust then the database, we can then connect to that via Scriptcase, and then we can deploy our project here if we wanted to, or we could deploy it anywhere really, and still just use this for the database. If you don't want to set up an Apache server on here, you don't want backups, whatever it is, it's very easy. All you have to do then is just remove here all of these options. So here I could remove then the Apache PHP server, as well as the MySQL, and remove the phpMyAdmin, and just for instance have the file browser running here, or the FTP, or whatever it is that we actually want. Now using stacks in Docker is super powerful, and I have a whole collection of these already because like I say, I've been using this for a little while. And it's definitely worth using, and it's definitely worth your time. So the advantages of using this Portainer is that you don't have to use the CLI or the command line interface. It's visually managed. It's managed via your browser also. So I could open up a web browser and I can then access the Portainer interface, which is quite good. We have then also the image and container management. It's all built into it. The multi-container applications, again, Docker stacks, which is very powerful indeed, giving you a project level view basically, I guess, of your entire environment that you require for your project. So instead of using the standard Docker environment, and you are creating individual containers and downloading all of those images, creating those volumes yourself, creating all those Docker files basically, and making all those definitions, using the stack is so much easier. And it allows for much faster deployment also within Portainer. So now, if I wanted to basically install Portainer within the Linux version or without the GUI of Docker, then I could basically, I think the command is docker volume create portainer underscore data. And then of course we need to run Portainer, which is typically on the port 8000. So if I come here then localhost again, and I go port 8000, I should now have the Portainer, which I'm actually being refused there, so I may have something else going on here. But typically that's the port of it, or I could check there the 9443. 9443. Nope, and that's not it either. Check here on the dashboard. We have the environment is standalone, the volumes, the networks, everything's indicated here. We can also see our containers that are running. 6 are running, 0 are healthy, 0 are stopped, and 0 are unhealthy. So everything's running quite nicely there, and I can click on those containers and then it will take me to the containers there. We have then also all of the images that have been downloaded, as well as then the network. You'll see here my dev network, my dev monitor net, which has been added here, my dev, and that is then created as a bridge for our network. We have then also the volumes here defined, my dev MySQL data. So that is then also defined there. And then we have a list of events there also. And then we have here also all of the host information. So here we can then view the details, setup, and we have here the option to enable host management features, enable volume management for non-administrators, as well as further options there. And you may want to adjust those as you need. Now you do notice that some features require the business feature, but that is not really for all of them. Now we have some environment information here as well. So we have here the local host, and we can check that out there also, which is then quite nice. The groups, tags, and so forth, we can apply those, registries, as well as logs for the authentication are there, notifications, and then you have your default settings. So let's check here in our settings, and we have everything there by default as it was only just installed. And then of course you have the get help option there as well. So if you need help, you can just click that and then off you go. So then basically with the Docker /Portainer setup and run, well, it's pretty easy to use. And then with that, then you can deploy your Scriptcase applications locally, use maybe a different version of PHP that you may need, or a different version of MySQL server, whichever it is, you can then set them up quite easily using Docker. And all of them in one go. So I can have 10 databases all running side by side, all on different ports maybe, or however you please. So it is important that, of course, in the use of Scriptcase, that it, using Docker as well as Portainer does solve a few issues maybe, especially with the setup of the server, because as many of you for sure know, setting up a server can take a great deal of time, and then using Docker, well, as you see, it's done in a few moments. So within a few minutes, we have a full environment up and running. And then, of course, we can, if we wanted to, we could deploy other options as well. So within the templates, for instance, we can then go ahead and install any of these. So if I install, say, something else, here we have another web server. We have MariaDB there, we have Joomla, we have so many others here, all available, even an Ubuntu GUI version, WordPress, SQL Server, and they're all available within this template list. Now, if I want any of these, I can then basically just come here, click on the one that I want. So if I say want Drupal, for instance, for some reason that went back there. And okay, so here I have then the Drupal option. And once I've clicked it here, it then sets it up at the top here. And then I can say here, my Drupal, my Drup. With the network, I can then select the network. So if I can add it here to my dev monitor net if I wanted to, or say no network, or host bridge, which is typically the best way to go. And then you can also enable or disable here the access control, and then just click on deploy the container. And then just like that, we have then also Drupal fully deployed next to my typical development environment. And we can see that here, we have the container there. And if I come back here to the stacks, we have here my dev, and you'll see then that that is not deployed as a stack because you create the stacks as I've just done, and that will just deploy that basically as a container. So if I come here into this container, and this is then the same as all of the containers, you have then the option to start, stop, kill, restart, pause, remove, recreate, duplicate as you need. Now it is important to note that you have here logs as well, and then you can see the logs of what is happening with this environment. So here, could not reliably determine the server's fully qualified domain name. Of course not. And then you have other errors or issues or whatever it is that you may need to deal with depending on the container or stack even that you have deployed. So here in this stack, you'll see that we do not have Drupal added in here, and it is really just as a separate container. So I can just click here the checkbox and I can just stop that container if I wanted to. And I can even just go ahead and select it again and remove it just as I need to. And then we have here the option to remove the non-persistent volumes. In some cases, that is a good idea. In some cases, not. That will, of course, be your choice. So Docker is pretty awesome. And with that, I will, of course, be adding the stack here into a text file and adding that available for you to download. Now note, if you are a member of ScriptcaseByJamie, you will find a whole collection of these stacks over in the members knowledge base. Okay, so right there you will have a whole collection of stacks that I use myself. These are applications I use locally. That could be for note taking, that could be for time management, whatever it is. I have them all available there, as well as various development environments that I use and have pre-configured and set up. That would be then also for Python, for WordPress, and so on. And you have those all available there for you to use, of course, as a ScriptcaseByJamie member. Now, you non-members, you will have access to this stack that I've just showed you here in the video. And of course, I hope you enjoy it. And if you have any questions, any doubts, you know where to find me. Just reach out, leave me some comments below how you use Docker, if you love it, if you hate it, whatever it be. And of course, don't forget to check out the video over on the Scriptcase Brazil website, because I tell you, it is a very interesting video, and seeing Scriptcase generate applications much faster within Docker, it does make sense though, because we are removing a lot of those limitations. It's running within a clean environment basically, and with that, of course, anything will run faster than on your own machine. And that is where Docker is pretty powerful and very useful, because everything works. I say everything works. It works faster, okay? And with that, you will for sure love it. And the possibility of using multiple databases, so you could use phpMyAdmin with MySQL, or you could just use MySQL, as well as then maybe a MySQL server, whichever you like. You can combine multiple databases, run them within separate containers, and use them all for your development needs, making Docker so powerful and definitely so useful. So I should have maybe created a video on this a long time ago, but it's what it is. And well, with that, I hope you have enjoyed this video. And of course, as before, if you liked the video, you know what to do. Hit that like button. I know you then like this content and maybe want more content like this, but otherwise,